Welcome everyone to this solo playthrough of Dungeons & Dragons classic Lost Mine of Phandelver. This is episode 8, in which our party finally enters Cragmaw Castle in search of the kidnapped Gundrun, and the rest of the group discover that Valanthe has another motive for being there. I hope you enjoy it, and please do let me know in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can catch the whole series. Last time, the party finally left Phandalin, with Merrick reluctantly rejoining them, and the party somewhat reluctantly accepting him back. They journeyed north into the Neverwinter Woods to find Cragmaw Castle, and were set upon by a hungry ogre. Having dispatched the ogre, the party camped overnight in the woods, and Vandross received a strange vision in a dream of making a pact with his new sword Talon. We rejoin the party as they wake to a new day. As they emerge from their tents the next morning, everyone feels the effect of their adventures so far, and they gain a level of experience in their class. However, following his strange dream, Vandross gains a level in Warlock. He looks at the blade in the morning light, and notices the inscription of the name Talon, and the hilt works in the shape of a bird of prey with outspread wings. Yes, this definitely is the blade he saw in his dream. "Valanthe," he says, "with your magical ability, are you able to tell me anything about this sword?" "Of course," replies Valanthe. She pulls an owl feather out of her component pouch, as well as the pearl they found in Glassstaff's quarters. She holds the feather and the pearl together in one hand, and the sword in the other, and casts the spell Identify. After a minute, she says, "Well, this definitely is a magical sword, which gives it greater power in battle. I also sense a connection to its previous owner." So we roll a history check to see if this discovery enables her to remember anything more about the history of the sword. We get a 23. "Yes, I remember now. This sword belonged to the great knight named Aldis Tresendar, also known as the Black Hawk. He died fighting off the orcs that attacked through the hidden cavern we found below the manor. The sword was thought to be lost, but clearly the Nothic found it. This is a great weapon for you to be wielding, Vandross. Treat it with care and respect." Vandross nods and is thoughtful for a moment. "Are you all right, Vandross?" says Valanthe. "Yes, of course. Thank you, Valanthe, for that information." Once they've had breakfast and packed away their camp, they set off again in search of Cragmaw Castle. So we roll for a weather check, and we get an 8. It is a cool, misty morning, although the rain of the previous day has now cleared. As the party ventures further north, the forest around them grows denser and more oppressive. Towering trees with thick, gnarled trunks rise up on either side, their branches intertwining to form a canopy so dense that only specks of light manage to filter through, casting shifting patterns of shadow on the forest floor. The air is thick with the earthy scent of damp moss and decaying leaves, and the underbrush is a tangle of brambles, ferns, and low-hanging vines. As we enter the next hex, we roll to see if there is an encounter. We get a 3. So their journey through this part of the forest is uneventful. As they head further through the dense trees, there seems to be no clear path. "Hey, Vandross," says Torga. "Do you know where we're going?" We roll a survival check for Vandross. He only gets a 3. Vandross looks up at Torga with a start, and then around him at the forest floor. He has no idea where they are. He is clearly still in a distracted state, following his overnight vision. "Oh, I thought you were tracking the way," says Torga. "Let me try." She rolls a 23 for survival. She scans the ground closely for footprints, and soon sees a faint trail heading north through the trees. And before long they see the castle ahead of them, surrounded by the dense forest. As they approach, Torga continues to look for footprints on the ground, and she can discern a second path leading round to the south side of the castle. The castle looming before them consists of 7 crumbling towers of different sizes and heights, but the upper stories are all in varying states of collapse. A short flight of steps leads up to a terrace in front of the main entryway, which is overlooked by slit windows in the towers above. They decide to follow the overgrown path around to the side in the hope of finding an unguarded entrance. They discover some old stone steps leading up to a large iron side door, which is locked. Arrow slits 10 feet above them overlook this entrance. Merrick immediately pulls out his thieves' tools, and Torga casts guidance on him as he attempts to pick the lock. He rolls a 14. Even with the support from Torga, the lock resists Merrick's efforts and refuses to budge. "Damn it," he says. He's angry that he's not able to prove his worth this way. They then consider whether to try to break the door down. Valanthe looks up and notices the narrow slit windows above them. She listens carefully. She rolls 20 for perception. From the room above, she hears a clatter of crockery and an angry exchange between goblins arguing over whether the dishes need cleaning. They decide that bashing the door down could make too much noise and alert these goblins. They return to the front of the castle and look upwards towards the main entrance. They can see the wreckage of a pair of large broken down doors and a shadowed hall behind. They have a whispered discussion about whether they could infiltrate the castle by pretending to be the Red Brand ruffians. "Why don't we just sneak in using those red cloaks like we did in the Red Brand hideout?" says Merrick. So we ask the question, do they still have these cloaks? We roll a 2, so no they don't. They check in their packs and discover they have not all brought the cloaks with them, so this deception approach is not possible. Valanthe peers up at the slit windows overlooking the terrace and listens again. All is quiet. She whispers to her owl familiar, who is sitting on her shoulder. It gives a quick flap and flies forward. We make a stealth check for the owl. It gets 15. Valanthe's owl familiar glides silently in through the broken entrance. We then roll for perception for the owl, and it gets a 20. Valanthe can see the ruined grandeur of this old castle through the owl's keen eyes. The entrance hall is dimly lit, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of damp stone. Broken sections of ceiling have crumbled away, leaving piles of rubble scattered across the uneven floor. The hall is empty and has a series of closed wooden doors. Having surveyed the area, the owl swoops back to Valanthe. Now knowing the entrance hall is empty, they decide their best approach is to try and creep in as quietly as possible to avoid alerting any goblins further in. They all make a roll for stealth. Having cast guidance on herself, Torga gets a 13. Valanthe rolls a 7, Vandross a 4, and Merrick gets a 1. However, due to having the lucky trait, he can roll again and gets a 17. Knowing that she has noisy armour on, Torga treads very carefully up the stairs and onto the stone porch area. The others are not so careful. Vandross trips on a step, and his sword makes a loud clanging noise against the stone, and then Valanthe sneezes very loudly. From the narrow slit windows flanking the entrance, they hear the sudden shout of goblin voices, and a whistle of arrows cuts the air. The first arrow flies at Torga, but the shot glances harmlessly off her shoulder plate. The second goblin fires at Valanthe, and this one finds its mark. She lets out a sharp hiss of pain as the arrow pierces her side. The third arrow flies true, and Vandross barely has time to react before it strikes him and embeds deeply in his shoulder. The fourth goblin takes careful aim at Merrick and fires. The arrow strikes with brutal accuracy, piercing through Merrick's leather armour. "We're under attack!" shouts Torga. "Everyone run!" The party breaks into a sprint, dashing up the steps and darting into the entrance hall. Above them, the goblins' shrieks of alarm echo through the castle. Inside the entrance hall, doors stand closed to the north and south, with a crumbling mound of rubble partially obscuring the southern hall. To the east, a broad corridor ends in 2 more doors leading south and east. The corridor is cluttered with dusty rubble and fallen plaster from a partial collapse of the ceiling overhead. But before the party has time to survey their surroundings, doors on both ends of the entrance hall burst open. Through the doorway to the south, a goblin can be seen raising its shortbow. Behind it, more goblins hold their weapons at the ready. From the door to the north, a menacing hobgoblin strides into the hall, clad in battered but sturdy armour, a longsword gripped tightly in one hand. More figures move in the shadows behind him. So we roll for initiative. Merrick is the first to take action. He moves into line of sight and quickly raises his bow and takes aim at the lead hobgoblin. With his assassinate ability, he has advantage on this attack. However, his footing is not stable with the remains of the door beneath his feet. His shot goes wide, hits the wall and clatters to the ground as Merrick stumbles into Torga. "Merrick, what are you doing? Get off me!" shouts Torga. Merrick swiftly retreats back out of line of sight and hides. Valanthe then steps forward and targets the first hobgoblin with Ray of Frost. A shard of frost streaks through the dim hall, striking the lead hobgoblin square in the chest. She then steps back out of sight. The goblins go next, and they take turn to shoot at Vandross from the southern doorway. The first goblin takes careful aim. The shot strikes true, sinking into Vandross' side with a painful impact. The second goblin, perhaps too eager, fumbles with its bowstring, and the arrow clatters harmlessly against the stone floor. The third goblin tries to step forward, but with the cramped space and his allies in the way, he can't get a clear shot. Then it's the hobgoblin's turn. With disciplined precision, the first hobgoblin charges at Torga, bringing its longsword down in a powerful swing. But the blow glances off her shield, barely making her flinch. The second hobgoblin follows suit, attempting to overwhelm her, but in its haste, the blade swings wide, missing entirely. Further back, 2 more hobgoblins take up their bows. The first archer looses an arrow, but the shot goes embarrassingly high, striking the stone wall with a dull thunk. The second archer, however, takes careful aim. With a sharp twang, the arrow streaks forward and embeds itself deeply into Torga's side, doing significant damage. She is immediately taken below half hit points. Vandross, despite already being blooded, heroically charges into battle. With a swift strike from Talon, he takes down the first goblin in one clean action. Without hesitation, he swings again with his longsword, landing a solid blow on the second goblin. It stumbles, wounded, barely holding on, but still standing. Torga eyes the 3 hobgoblins in front of her, sizing them up. She glances back to see where Merrick is, and moves a little further into the room. She raises her fist to the sky as she channels the divine power within her and casts Thunderwave, empowered by her destructive wrath, which means it does full damage. With a fierce shout, a blast of thunderous energy erupts from Torga, rippling through the air. The shockwave rattles the stone walls as it slams into the hobgoblins. The first hobgoblin, despite managing to brace itself, is overcome by the energy of the thundering blast and slumps to the floor with a final grunt. The second hobgoblin resists the full force of the blast. However, it's looking worse for wear as the lightning sparks crackle all over it, but it still holds its ground. The third hobgoblin is blasted off its feet by the full force of the thunder wave. It crumples to the ground, its armour clattering as it collapses. Merrick then emerges from the shadows next to Torga and strikes the hobgoblin in front of them with his short sword. The combined damage from his strike and the sneak attack overwhelms the creature. It staggers once and then crumples to the floor, lifeless, its weapon slipping from its grasp. Valanthe then steps forward, and holding out her hands, she casts Ray of Frost at the goblin in front of Vandross. The beam strikes the goblin square in the chest and freezes it in place, the cold rapidly spreading across its body. The creature lets out a sharp panic cry before collapsing to the floor. There is now only 1 goblin and 1 hobgoblin left at either end of the hall. The goblin, seeing its fellows go down and realising it's now alone at this end of the hall, decides to make a run for it. He tries to take a quick shot at Vandross, but misses, and then uses his bonus action to disengage as he runs past Vandross and then down the rubble-strewn passage out of sight. The remaining hobgoblin, seeing the odds turn against him, keeps his distance and takes aim with his longbow. The arrow strikes Torga square in the chest, her armour offering some protection but still taking a hit. Vandross decides not to pursue the fleeing goblin. He can hear shouts coming from around the corner, and it seems there may be more goblins lying in wait, so he decides not to proceed alone. He turns to see the others are still fighting 1 hobgoblin. He uses his second wind as a bonus action and regains 7 hit points. He then successfully hides behind the door, waiting for any other goblins to come back around the corner. Torga whispers the dark incantation of Toll the Dead. The eerie sound of a bell rings out through the hall, and the hobgoblin clutches his head in agony. As the creature is still reeling, Merrick quickly notches an arrow in his shortbow and takes aim. The arrow strikes the hobgoblin square in the chest, and with a final ragged gasp, the creature collapses onto the floor, lifeless. As the noise from the fighting subsides in the hall, Droop appears from where he had been hiding round the corner outside, and he starts to collect any loot he can find on the hobgoblins. The group can now hear the goblins shouting from the room around the corner to the south. They look up and see Vandross lurking in the shadow just by the door. He puts his finger to his lips. Torga says to Droop, "Shh, be quiet, we think there might be more enemies coming." Droop looks up at Torga and is visibly shaking. He drops everything on the floor with a clatter and faints. "Useless goblin," mutters Merrick. The 3 of them creep over to where Vandross is standing. They all decide to hide and wait to see if the goblins reappear. Merrick rolls a 25 for stealth and Valanthe a 10. However, Torga, with her disadvantage, only gets an 8. Merrick and Valanthe successfully merge into the shadows. However, Torga is still standing in plain sight. Vandross uses his action this turn to hold an attack if he sees a goblin appearing. After a few moments of silence, the faint sound of shuffling footsteps echoes in the passage from the next room. Some of the goblins, still cautious but curious, creep round the corner, hoping to catch a glimpse of what happened to their comrades. They're all a stealth of 22. The goblins creep round the corner stealthily, so Vandross doesn't see or hear them coming. The first goblin peers around the edge of the doorway, and spotting Torga standing in the hall, it quickly knocks an arrow to its short bow and lets it fly towards her. The arrow whizzes through the air, but the aim is off, missing Torga entirely as it clashes against the stone wall. The goblin hisses in frustration, realizing it may have revealed his position too soon. Vandross immediately sees his goblin emerge from the shadows in front of him. He lunges forward, his sword gripped tightly, and strikes with precision, the blade sinking deep into the goblin's chest. The creature lets out a brief strangled cry before crumpling to the ground. The remaining goblin, still lurking in the shadows, sees its comrade fall to Vandross's strike, and quickly retreats, silently making its way eastward out of sight. The party waits silently, holding their breath for a moment, continue to hide and hold their actions in case more goblins come. But all is silent, and no more goblins appear. "Is that all of them?" whispers Torga. Vandross shrugs. "Can't tell. There could be more waiting for us around the corner, but it's very quiet now." "I can send my owl in to scout the next room," says Valanthe calmly. Valanthe whispers to her owl familiar, and it flaps silently round the corner. It flies high up in the rafters in an attempt to remain unseen. However, there is little cover for it. Through the owl's eyes, Valanthe has a glimpse of the room next door. This must once have been the castle's banquet hall, with a soaring ceiling 25 feet high. 2 large wooden tables with plain benches stand in the middle of the room, and a brass brazier full of glowing coals is tucked into one corner. Dirty dishes, half-full stew pots, mouldy chunks of bread, and gnawed bones cover the tables. Valanthe gives a gasp as she sees 7 goblins all standing ready and waiting with arrows aimed at the entrance from the rubble-strewn passage. Behind them there is a further large fat goblin holding a ladle who appears to be the cook. There's a sudden twang of a bowstring, and an arrow flies directly at the owl familiar, which instantly blinks out of existence. Valanthe lets out a small cry, feeling the wrench as her familiar is shot down. She shakes her head as her vision suddenly switches back to her current position. "What is it?" says Torga. "A room full of goblins. I'm not sure how many, 6 or more. They shot down my owl." "Oh no!" cries Torga. "I'm so sorry, Valanthe." "It's all right," says Valanthe. "It's just frustrating, because I'll have to resummon him, and I don't have all the components here to do that. So we're now stuck without his vision." "Should we go in and charge them?" says Vandross. "No, I don't think so," says Valanthe. "They're all standing there waiting with their bows ready. Whoever goes first through that passage will get peppered with arrows." "Maybe there's another way round," says Torga. "Yes," says Valanthe. "Besides, this is not the room I'm seeking anyway. It looked like some sort of food hall." "What are you seeking then, Valanthe? You haven't told us that," says Merrick. Valanthe replies grimly. "There's an old shrine to my deity Ogma in this castle. I have received visions that it's being desecrated by the goblins. They must be stopped." "Oh, well, let's try this way then," says Torga, and she moves towards the eastern door. However, she does not see the tripwire concealed in the debris on the floor in this area. Her boot catches on the wire as she strides towards the door. There's an almighty crash as beams and masonry above are dislodged and smashed down to the area where Torga is standing. She makes a dexterity save of 19. Fortunately, Torga looks up just in time to see the falling debris before it hits. She manages to jump back and avoid the full force of the crash. However, she still takes a small amount of damage. The noise echoes through the castle. Goblins in the surrounding areas are now on alert, if they weren't already. Droop, who is now awake again, rushes over to Torga in a panic. "Oh, no! You're hurt! Let me help you!" he cries. He tears some scraps of dirty cloth from the hobgoblin's clothing and tries to bandage her. "Oh, thank you so much, Droop," says Torga. "That's so kind of you." The bandages don't really help at all, and being so dirty, they maybe could infect her wounds. But she's grateful to Droop anyway. The pile of debris means that access to the eastern door is now difficult, so they decide to explore further north. Vandross says, Targa, let me lead the way. You're already badly hurt. He moves northwards up the hall, scanning for any more traps. He rolls a 7 for perception. The light in the hall is a bit dim, so he doesn't see anything that looks like a trap. In front of him to the north is the door that the hobgoblins came through. To the west is a closed wooden door. Vandross decides to search all the rooms here, now he knows that Valanthe is looking for some sort of shrine. He opens the wooden door to his left and finds 2 goblins cowering in the archer lookout. They shriek in terror when they see Vandross and back away.
No, don't hurt us,
one of them pleads.
We help you.
Hey y'all, says Vandross back to the rest of the party. What should we do with these 2? Before anyone else can respond, Valanthe steps forward, her gaze cold and unwavering as she moves beside Vandross. All goblins here must pay for their sins against Ogma, she says with a steely tone. With a swift motion, she casts Ray of Frost on the first goblin, sending a beam of ice streaking through the air. And with a critical hit, the goblin is instantly frozen, the ice encasing its body before it crashes to the ground, dead. The second goblin shrieks even more as Valanthe raises her hands again. Wait! Stop! cries Torga. What are you doing, Valanthe? The goblin is surrendering and may have useful information. Like, where is this shrine? And where is Gundrun? Valanthe looks at Torga and nods. Yes, okay, you're right. This one may have use yet. You, goblin, she says. Where is the shrine room?
What?
Cries the goblin in a panic.
Oh, right, yeah! Through that door up there!
And he points to a door behind them further north. And where's Gundrun? Says Torga. The dwarf who was brought here.
Further back, in the master's room.
It stammers. The master?
King Groll, of course.
You will show us the way, says Valanthe.
Not likely,
says the goblin, and he makes a run for it. He uses bonus action disengage, dives between Vandross's legs, and makes a run for the entrance. He uses his action to dash to get as much distance as he can from the castle. You see, you can't trust these goblins, says Valanthe. Merrick has been listening to this conversation with great interest, as they see a different side of Valanthe. Before the goblin can get too far away, he raises his short bow and shoots. The arrow misses and sings past the goblin's ear. Merrick turns to look at Valanthe.
So, Miss High and Mighty Valanthe, it seems we aren't so different after all. Killing a goblin in cold blood, eh?
Merrick, I am nothing like you. I serve a higher power. My actions are dedicated to a spiritual purpose. Merrick shrugs.
I don't see what difference it makes anyway. It still results in a dead goblin, doesn't it?
Valanthe looks at Merrick in silence, and then turns away. She says to the others, Come, let's find this shrine. Vandross leads the way into the room to the north. Here they find old casks of salted meat and sacks of rotting grain in a storage area. Among the supplies there is a bloody suit of chainmail, a heavy crossbow, and an unsheathed longsword with the emblem of Neverwinter worked into its hilt. Vandross sees the longsword. Well, that's a mighty fine sword, he says as he picks it up and looks at it closely. We roll a history check, and he gets a 10. Well, I recognise this. It's the emblem of Neverwinter. I wonder who it belonged to. It looks better than the old longsword I got from the Rivera hideout. I think I'll take it. Merrick then says, Hang on a moment. You got that magical sword from the Rivera hideout. I think I should get this one. Yeah, that seems fair, says Vandross, and he starts to hand the sword over. Hold on, says Torga. Let me take a look at that. She rolls an intelligence check of 15. This must have belonged to a guard or someone else associated with the defence of Neverwinter. I suspect this is Sildar's sword. Remember, he didn't have any armour or weapons on him when we found him in the Cragmaw hideout. The goblins must have taken it. I think we should give it to Droop to carry back to Phandelver. She hands it over to Droop, who is now literally starting to droop under a very heavy backpack.
Oh yes, I'll look after that one, he says.
Merrick's face twists in frustration. He then notices a small cask with a tap on it.
Well, I don't suppose this belongs to anyone.
He peers at a label written in Dwarven. The picture suggests it's filled with a fine brew, though he can't tell what type of drink it is. He's curious enough to give it a try. He grabs a grubby glass standing next to the cask and gives it a rough wipe out with a handkerchief and pours himself some of the dark liquid. He gives it a sip.
That's very nice brandy,
he says, and he downs the glass.
Gives you a nice warm feeling inside. Anyone else want some?
Vandross says, Okay, I'll give it a try. Don't get the chance to have fine brandy very often. Vandross fills the glass and empties it. Yep, that definitely hits the spot. They both regain 1 hit point. Anyone else? He says as he holds up the glass. Torga and Valanthe decline the offer. Torga and Vandross move forward to investigate the hobgoblin sleeping area. 4 plain straw pallets and bedrolls are lined up on the floor of this barracks. Brackets on the walls hold a number of weapons: spears, swords, morning stars. The north wall shows signs of damage, but the floor is swept clean of rubble. Meanwhile, Merrick decides to have a second glass of the brandy. He gives a loud hiccup after emptying the glass. He is now a bit drunk and takes the poison condition, which means he has disadvantage on attack and saving throws. Valanthe is starting to get impatient and wants to find the shrine room. She opens the door to the east. This chamber occupies the northern tower of the castle. A stone altar stands in the middle of the room, covered with a blood-stained black cloth. Gold and ritual implements, a chalice, a knife, and a censer, are carefully arranged on top of the altar. 2 archways to the south are covered with heavy, albeit tattered, curtains. There is a goblin priest and its 2 acolytes kneeling at the altar that was once dedicated to Ogma. They all wear filthy robes over their armour. Valanthe gasps as she sees the desecrated altar now being used to worship the goblin deity Maglubiet. When the goblins hear Valanthe, they leap up. They are not surprised by her appearance at the door, having been alerted by the noise when the trap was triggered. They shout and all aim their bows at her. And there we will leave our party for now, with Valanthe's impatience to reclaim the shrine, meaning she has put herself into danger from 3 goblins defending the shrine room, whilst the rest of the party are still distracted, searching the barracks and storage area. Tune in again next time to discover where this story goes.